Hello again, students. It's time for more Beat Detective.
Yay! We're excited. Drum editing is fun.
Okay, now we're looking at the multi-track. So we've got a little overview of how Beat Detective generally works. Now we're gonna get into the nitty-gritty stuff. So you see here, I've got a drum comp. This is the same drum track as before, but this is the multi-track of it, and we're gonna be tackling Beat Detective in a way that is much more likely the way that you will all be using it, which is just a little bit more complex, a little bit more involved on the multi-track level, rather than dealing with the stereo files, which is like, maybe useful for if you're editing existing drum loops or something. But for most of our professional commercial projects, we'll have multi-track drums, and we'll be editing them thusly. And a couple different ways of using Beat Detective to do this. I'm gonna try to cover all of them. I think if you're anything like me, and I hope you are. Actually, that's not true. I hope you're nothing like me at all. Don't be like me. Anyway, what's going to end up happening most likely is you're going to have a preference for the different workflow approaches dependent on the task that you're trying to do with them rather. So you end up using a combination of techniques when working with Beat Detective in the real world. I am going to show you a workflow that is just the one way, and then I'll show you another workflow that's just the other way. And in reality, you will probably mix and match depending on your needs. And those needs can be anything from the complexity of the part to just like how much time you have on a session. There's ways that are faster, but maybe not quite as detail oriented. And they yield results that might fall into the like good enough category. And in some cases you'll just kind of be stuck using those, and in other cases you'll be able to do a big crazy full deep dive and get like super particular about it. So let's do it without further ado. All right, remember, we need to first and foremost save, or rather render, the audio as a exactly beginning and exactly ending on a quarter note. So first thing I want to do, I just want to point out, this is a comp, so you can see in playlist view here, we've got a few different takes that I've comped together. Before I go rendering anything, I want to zoom way in, make sure that all my crossfades are in place. Needless to say, I have listened to this piece of audio, and my edits are clean. Please do that before you consolidate things. Don't consolidate a comp that hasn't been crossfaded and double checked. You will be entering a world of pain if you do that. In order to manage this group of tracks, we need to create a group. So in order to create a group, select all the tracks you want in the group. I'm going to press Command G. That's going to bring up the Create Group dialog. And the way Pro Tools works is it will alphabetically try to assign the group that you are creating based on the first available letter of the alphabet. So in other words, with no groups created, the first group ID that it tries to give me is group A. The next one would be group B, so on and so forth. That is not a good method for me. I don't like it. Rather, I'd like to create a drum group, and I'm going to put it under ID D. D is for drums, everyone. Okay? So what's nice about this is every single time I open up a Pro Tools session, I know what group ID my drums have. It's D 100% of the time, no matter what style of music I'm working on, when I recorded it, where I recorded it, blah, 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 blah. D is drums, period. This is a huge time saver. If I created a drum group now and then recorded some guitar overdubs and then recorded a guitar overdub, and I let drums default to A and then guitar default to B, well, maybe next time I'm recording, the first thing I record is a guitar part, and then guitar's A, and then the drums are next, and now drums are B, and now I have disorganization in my brain, where different sessions have different group IDs. This becomes very tedious, and it's just no fun. So I don't do that. I just don't do it. Drums are D. Gosh darn it. We're going to double check the global attributes. That's going to be volume and mute. That means if I manipulate the volume on one track, all the other tracks will follow it. Likewise with mute, likewise with send, mutes, solos, and automation mode. For your groups, you may want to, group together the record enable, whatever you like. Make sure that you are set for the purposes of Beat Detective to a mix/edit group, or at the very least, an edit group. In my case, it's pretty much always mix/edit. I like the convenience of having one group control both of those functions. So now I press OK, and I have a group. You'll notice if I select here, it's going to grab everything and highlight. Now, one last note about this ID situation that I'm now talking way too much about is when I'm on this screen, I like to keep my group keyboard focus selected in the groups section over here. That allows me to press the letter that corresponds to my group ID to turn it off or on. So look, I can press D and my drum group turns off and on. That's pretty hip. If I make a kick group and assign it to K, and if I make a snare group and I assign it to S, and I make a toms group and assign it to T. If I want to turn the toms off or on, I press T. If I want to turn snare off or on, I press S. Kick is K, drums are D. So now from the mix window, I'm able to manage all my groups with a single keystroke. It saves me time. I don't have to scroll over here and click around and whatever, do a bunch of nonsense there. It's possible that some of you aren't yet experienced enough in Pro Tools to fully wrap your head around why this is a huge time saver and efficiency boon. But just take my word for it. It is. Get into this habit and you will become much faster at Pro Tools much more quickly. Whew, okay, enough about groups. This is Beat Detective, gosh darn it. But wait, there's more. We're not at Beat Detective yet. We need to duplicate all these playlists. Okay, and I'm going to name them something useful like comp. This is a comp take. So you can either right click and open up the batch rename dialog for all of the selected tracks, or you can use the key command, Option Shift and the letter R, and I'm going to tell it to look for 04, which is the playlist designation that Pro Tools automatically assign to these playlists, and I'm going to replace that with comp. Ta-da! Now I have my comp. You may notice over the course of class and these various online lessons and stuff that I like my sort of main playlist to be this first playlist that appears in Pro Tools. I like to call it sometimes playlist 0. As you probably all know by now, when you make a new playlist, the first one that shows up is going to be .01. And when I'm recording a band, this is where I record take number 1. And then I record take number 2 onto playlist 2. And when I'm comping, I comp to my main playlist, playlist 0. And then I duplicate from there to create backups of my work. And then I continue working on my main playlist. This workflow keeps me sort of, I'm always looking at playlist 0 to be the sort of master playlist and the most up-to-date playlist. A little workflow tip that I think is extremely helpful. Okay, so we're back on playlist 0, my main playlist. We just pressed F4. We're in grid mode. We're going to go exactly to a quarter note. You'll notice I'm a little bit past or a little bit earlier than the beginning and a little bit past the end. That's okay. We're going to Option Shift 3, consolidate, and now we are ready to open up Beat Detective. Still on my laptop, so I cannot press Command 8 on the numeric keypad, so I have to grab it from the event window. And now comes a philosophical discussion. If you all remember the drums from the earlier video, same part, I'll play it once for you just to refresh your memories. high energy rock. There it is. So the drum part is primarily being driven by the kick and the snare. So when I'm using Beat Detective, I am going to be primarily looking at the kick and the snare to define the time and the pocket of the drum part. This is a super deep topic that I could talk about at length, and I'm sure I will, unfortunately for you all. But I'm going to just give you a quick rundown in this video, because otherwise I will pontificate at length, and we'll never get to the damn point. But when you're editing a drum track, you need to think about what is driving the rhythm. In most rock music, it's going to be kick and snare. If for some reason you find yourself using Beat Detective on like a jazz drum kit, you might be looking at the ride cymbal as the main keeper of time, whatever, and different musical traditions are going to have different sort of central components to whatever the trap kit might be. So this is something that you're going to have to ask yourself every time you sit down to edit drums. But I would say probably like 99% of the time you're looking at kick and snare. And the first version of editing in Beat Detective that I'm going to show you is going to be what we call normal mode. Now, it's actually not the normal mode that I use in some kind of weird linguistic ironic twist, but it's the simplest version, and it requires probably the least explanation. So we're starting there, and I think once you have your head wrapped around it, it becomes much easier to understand my preferred mode, which is collection mode, but we'll get to that. So how can we edit these drums? Well, if I have my drums grouped together and I say capture, eighth notes, low emphasis, analyze, okay, we get a bunch of transients. That's cool. But think about where it's looking to generate these transients. We might assume that it's looking at the kick in mic to generate the kick transient, because that's probably where the kick transient's loudest. But if you go looking through, you might find some moments where bleed from another instrument causes Beat Detective to misidentify what the main transient is. Here's a kind of a good example. Whatever's happening here, we can see that the purple line is a little bit after the snare transient. Now let's just listen to that to try to get a sense of what might be causing that. I don't know what's causing it, but life happens, It seems to care more about the hi-hat or something there. Who knows what's going on? It just got a little confused. Similarly, when we're looking at a spot where a tom and a snare hit at the same time, if the tom and the snare are flamming against each other like we have right here, I think what's going to happen is Beat Detective might try to split the difference between those two transients, or maybe it'll look more at the tom transient than the snare transient, and we don't necessarily want that if we want the snare to be the thing that's defining the rhythm. So we need to tell Beat Detective, rather than look at the entirety of all the drum tracks, we're going to select only the drum tracks that matter to us, kick and snare. And to sort of refine that idea even further, we want it to look at the parts of the drum kit that have the least spill, the least leakage, the least bleed, whatever you like to call it, the least sort of disruption of other parts of the drum set leaking into that microphone. So close mics, in other words. That's a really roundabout, long-winded way of putting it. Kick in is going to be a relatively isolated kick sound, right? There'll be a little bit of bleed from the rest of the kit, but the microphone's in its own little acoustic chamber. That is the kick drum. So it's sort of inherently a little bit cleaner, and snare top is probably going to be a better option for finding the snare transient than snare bottom, because snare bottom's probably going to have a significant amount of kick bleed in it, whereas hopefully snare top does not, right? So just choose your your sort of source material wisely. Now, what we can do to quickly navigate between this grouped situation in order to grab just snare, top, and just kick is Shift, Command, and G, you'll notice over here, is turning the groups off and on. So if I go like this and I say, oh shoot, my drums are all grouped together, how do I get to the kick and snare separately? Well, it's simple. Shift, Command, G, groups are turned off. Now I can very easily just select those two tracks. All right, so we press capture. We have to reanalyze because of all the tomfoolery I was doing earlier. And then I'm gonna make these tracks a little bigger so I can really try to see where the purple lines are landing relative to the transients. I'm gonna turn up my sensitivity till it looks like we're getting all of the transients. See, we're missing one here, so sensitivity is gonna go up a little further, and that looks cool. Now, I think y'all remember from the previous video that drum fill contained a 16th note, and I've told Beat Detective to only look at 8th notes, and as a result, we've got this little misfire over here where it is. This is occurring. Oh wait, I think I stand corrected. Maybe we're all good. Oh no, here we go. This is it. So this is occurring on a 16th note, the snare, but it's assigned to an 8th note. So we're going to remove that. Remember, we press Option. Our little hand symbol gets the subtraction symbol. We press it. Now we got to manually put one in where the actual intended 8th note was, and we can just double check that it's 2 480. That is, remember, 480 is going to be an 8th note. And I'll just take a quick look for any other misfires, and that looks good. And again, I've got my grid mode here set to 8th note, so these lighter vertical lines should indicate where I would expect to see a purple line marking a transient. If one of the purple lines were way over here, that would indicate to me a potential problem, and I'd want to zoom in on that and just take a closer look. Okay, so everything's looking good. Next step, scroll next. And now we're looking at the purple lines as it relates to the transient that it's trying to detect. So in other words, I had it analyze kick and snare at the same time, so it's given us a purple line on both those tracks. But we can tell here that it's actually looking at the snare track. So I don't really care what's going on up here. I'm gonna, with each scroll next look at a purple line, I'm gonna just make sure that it's lining up with the transient that I want it to be sort of registering as the leading part of the drum sound. So once again, we're going to do this very dull part together. Remember, this is a hugely critical step, and if you skip it, you will live to regret it, I can assure you. Okay, so that one's a bit early. If anyone starts gabbing at you about how glamorous and glorious the job of record production is, you can just show them this portion of the video and reiterate that this is a mere 12 seconds or so of audio, and normally we're doing this for like a 3 or 4 minute song, or for you metal people, well, let's just say if you plan on going into heavy metal production, you're a brave soul, and I hope you get really good at drum editing and you learn to love it. Anywho, purple lines are all looking good. So if I press separate now, it is going to separate the kick and the snare, because those are the tracks that I have selected. But I want it to perform this edit across the entire drum group. So all I got to do is turn my group back on by pressing Shift Command G, and we'll see this turn back on right there. And now if I hold Shift and click on any of the other tracks in my group, they all get selected, and you'll notice that the purple lines stay exactly where they were, but now they travel across every single drum track. So that's pretty groovy. And I press separate, the edit, that is the cutting that is now taking place to separate the clips. You can see that it's happened across all the drums. So Bam. We're in great shape. We switch to clip conform now. And again, we can either select strength at 100% for full quantization, or we can simply leave it turned off. But we went over that in the previous video. So now I'm going to take the opportunity to show you the way I like to use strength. A thing that's pretty cool about strength is that you can keep pressing it again and again and again, and Beat Detective will continue to move the audio closer and closer and closer to the desired destination. So in other words, if we zoom in way here, we'll notice we've got this distance from here to here between grid and transient. When I press conform at strength 50%, it's going to move that halfway closer to the grid. All right. Now if I press conform again, it's going to move it halfway between the current distance and the grid. For you math dweebs out there, that would be the same as if I had just told it to move it 75% in the first place. Okay. Why is that really useful? Well, let me tell you why. And rather let me demonstrate why, because I'm that kind of guy. I'm going to open up a click track here. And I'm going to play you the unedited drums against a click track so we can just kind of get a sense of how they sounded in their raw state. Okay, so he's playing a little on top of the beat in what I would consider, if I was producing this record, I might consider that a little ahead of the beat is a good thing. It's providing a little bit of forward momentum, and it feels a little more energetic, right? So if I hard quantize it, I'm gonna potentially lose some of that energy, potentially. So I'm gonna just say to myself, let me just start at 50%, conform 50%, and we'll listen. All right, that already sounds better to me. It's tighter, but I haven't lost that feeling of like energy, of leaning into the groove the way he is. But suppose I'm getting greedy and I want to try it even closer. Well, I can just press conform again. 2 50% is the same as 1 75%. Right? Let's see what it sounds like. All right, now I'm feeling a little cocky and I'm getting even greedier. I'm gonna go 50% again. I think that would put us at 87.5%. I went to music school, you guys, so don't rely on me too much for the math skills. But in any case, let's see what that sounds like. No, I don't like it. It's starting to sound a little stiff. Well, all I got to do to put it back to 75 is just hit undo, Command Z, bam. There you have it. The moral of that story is that a very handy way to use the strength control is to set it lower than you think you need it and just keep smashing that conform button a bunch of times until you find the spot where the drums are feeling appropriate. Whatever that means for you. You're the producer, you get to choose. So in my case, the 75% is feeling really good. I'm going to go with that. We're still going to skip over exclude and swing, just because someday we'll get there. As you may recall, the next step would be to fill the gaps. And then I'm going to bring up my batch fade window, drop those fades in, and we'll listen back. Curiously, I didn't hear any of those chirpy double hit ride transients like we had in the earlier video, which is, it's kind of cool. I don't know why that happened. I expected they'd be there. They're not. That is an illustration of how working on the multi-track will have to yield different results than working on a stereo file. Either that or I'm just deaf right now and it went by and I didn't notice it. In any case, we're going to move on because I do want to address the issue that I raised in the earlier video about flamming between different parts of the drum kit. And I heard a pretty noticeable one somewhere around here that I'm going to try to find. All right, so let's zoom in real big. And in particular, we're going to look at the ride because he's on the ride cymbal there, keeping time. Right here, we got our ride. But the kick's here. All right, so what's happening is that we have told Beat Detective that the kick and the snare are these sort of drivers of the groove, right? We want that. We want kick and snare to be the drivers. That was by design. But what that sometimes means is that the overall feel might get disrupted if there's a point where the drummer's limbs aren't necessarily in agreement with one another, which is a kind way of saying that they have flammed. And in this case, you can see it visually. You've got your kick transient here, and then some time goes by, and then the ride transient comes a little bit later. So, with the groups turned on, we can select the ride transient just before it, put a cut, Command E gives you that, and then just pull this thing back so that the ride transient's a little bit more in time. Now, you'll notice that chomps off the front of the kick drum, okay? Here's where I'm going to get a little bit heady, and hopefully you can follow along with this particular technique. You know, one thing that you could do in theory is simply take this ride cymbal, put it right on the grid, right? So we'll see right on the grid now. And then, you know, a common technique would be to just take your two kick mics, oops, let me turn my drum group off to do this. Take your two kick mics, go like this, put a fade there, and if you listen back to this, which I'll play it back for you, you know, in most cases you wouldn't notice this cheat, we'll call it. You know, there's technically going to be a flamming kick, but the kick's not going to be picked up all that loudly by the overheads or other elements or other microphones around the drum set, so you can probably get away with this. Let's check it out. Right? It's fine, but there's a better way, in my opinion at least, because while you might not be able to hear the bleed per se as two discrete kick hits, there's a chance that you could introduce a phase problem, right? Resetting the ride cymbal back to where it was. What I like to do when I'm making this kind of edit is, rather than putting the ride cymbal directly on the grid, I will try to find a part of the kick drum's polarity, either a positive or negative excursion, that I can align with the edit. In other words, I got the first part of my transient going up here, the second part is going down, and then I travel through time down the waveform of the kick, and I got another one that's going down. Lucky for me, that aligns pretty well with this ride cymbal. So if I take this whole chunk and try to align those negative excursions of the kick drum, what that means is that the how to put it, the negative excursion on the kick when I go like this is still roughly in the same spot. There is a negative excursion of the kick drum in the bleed. It's a different cycle, but it's still going to be the same, you know, the waveform's still traveling in the same direction. Meaning the bleed from this section will sum in a more phase happy way with its corresponding bleed everywhere else. That's a lot to think about. We'll probably talk about it in class. File that away for now as best you can. Ask me about it like next week or whatever. But hopefully that is making sense, that we've got this negative piece of the waveform with the kick waveform, and somewhere in the bleed, and all the other microphones, they're picking up that same negative waveform. I want to align that bleed, the negative excursion bleed, with the front of the kick drum when I move it. Does that make sense? I hope so. And then when I pull this thing back out, we'll have a slightly more constructive phase relationship between all of the microphones. Hope that makes sense. I'm going to play back the result. If it doesn't make sense, we'll talk about it in more detail, and I'll jump on the whiteboard or whatever and try to draw you some sweet diagrams. I love my whiteboard. But in the meantime, here's what that edit sounded like. All right, I'm going to zoom right in and just kind of give you a quick A/B on what that sounded like so you can really hear the result. I'm going to loop it. All right, and then if I undo all those edits, here's what it was like before. That sort of feeling. A little bit tighter. That is a detail that may or may not bother you, depending on the context. Frankly, in this context, it wasn't bumming me out too bad. There are other contexts where it might be glaring. You know, if you've got like a really heavy kick and snare sound, and they're maybe kind of more attack centric, if it's like a metal record or something, or a really fast hardcore record, you might find those transients to sound really funky when they flam against each other. And in the finished mix, a track like this or a performance like this might reveal some of those flammy issues more than in just the raw drum sounds that we're hearing now. But in any case, this is something that you just kind of do it at your discretion, and do it to try to just sort of fine tune the overall feel. All right, so I think we're in good shape there. Just to review the final step, duplicate it. We'll name it something like Beat Detective Unrendered. Okay, and then we go back to our main playlist. Option Shift 3, select all, Option Shift 3, and bam, we have a delightful multi-track drum that is now nicely gridded, or not quite gridded, right? 75% gridded. Sounding really good. Very musical. Next video is going to be that collection mode that I mentioned, which is my super duper ultra favorite way of working. It's a little slower, but I think you'll see the potential for it once we get into that. So tune back in for that one, and we will check it out. Thanks again.